It's time to increase your bankroll by decreasing your daily fantasy sports learning curve. The Curve with Benny Ricciardi and Josh Kalashi starts now.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Curve here at rotocurve.com. My name is Benny Ricciardi. I go by BRich11 on all the daily fantasy sites, and I'm here to walk you through our show today. We're going to be starting with a recap of yesterday's action, talking a little bit about today's weather situation, getting into some of the Vegas lines. We're going to go on and talk about some of the pitching options that we like today, and also some of the ones that we don't like. And moving on from there to talk about some hitters. And finally, we'll give you the cornerstones that we're going to be using to build our rosters tonight, and some of the guys that you think you should be looking at to put into your rosters as well. So before we get started, I just wanted to throw out one announcement. Today is the start of the first DK Survivor Tournament. It's at a $27 price point, has a $250,000 prize pool. I think it's $30,000 to first place. It's a 4-day Survivor Tournament, so make sure you get your entries in. Right now, it looks like there might be a little bit of overlay on it. So if you're somebody who likes this style of tournament, throw a couple entries in there, and you might really come out with a big score in the end. They're going to be running Survivors over on DraftKings for the next 2 weeks. There's a $5 price point that starts on June 29th, and then another, I think it's a $300 is the big one, a $300 price point on July 6th, and that one has a $400,000 prize pool and $100,000 to first place. So there's satellites running for the big one now. The $27 one, they had satellites running all week, so make sure you check and see. You might have won a couple tickets and not even realize it, but make sure you get your entries in there. We're actually running a little, I actually was lucky enough to get about 10 entries to this tournament. So we're running a little thing over in the RotoCurve forums. If you guys have a chance, make sure you get over there and check it out. Basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to run 5 two-team trains in the Survivor Tournament tonight. We'll talk about what a train is and how to play the Survivor Tournament in a second. But basically, I'm going to make one team, and I'm going to leave community to throw in your favorite team for tonight. I'm going to pick out 4 of those teams, and if your team winds up going on, you're going to be the one who controls that entry. So get a chance, go over and check it out in the RotoCurve forums. You guys will see what I'm talking about. It's a pretty good situation for today. So if you go ahead and you go over there, you throw in a lineup that we choose to use, you got a chance to make some free money because the entries are on me with some of the tickets that I was able to win. So let's have some fun and see if we can make some money on it. Before we get into anything today, I did want to go over the Survivor style tournament and some strategies that you might want to use if you're going to be, putting some entries in today or playing in the $5 price point or even in the $300 price point that's coming in 2 weeks. The idea of a Survivor tournament is just like the NCAA tournament. You want to survive in advance. You don't need to have the highest scoring roster on the first 3 days. You just need to have a roster that comes basically in the top 50%. I think the way they're doing it is they're cutting the field in half today. Then they're going to cut it in half again tomorrow. Then I think it goes down to like maybe 40% or something, moves on from there. So on the 3rd day, you might have to take a few more GPP type, tournament style chances. And then on the last day, if you're able to make it through to the last day, you're basically playing in a tournament with, guaranteed money. So at that point, if you make it to the last day, you're putting in basically a tournament style roster is what you want to be able to put into that tournament. You don't want to put in your same cash game roster. But for round 1 and round 2, you're basically using your cash game roster. You're playing in a 50-50 and hoping to make it up to the top of the order. Now, what a lot of people like to do is have a couple entries alive on the last day. So there's a couple different ways you can go about doing that. The one way that you'll hear people talk about most often is something called running a train. And what that basically means is you make a lineup, your cash game lineup that you like, that you want to enter in a tournament. And instead of entering it one time, you enter it 5, 10, 15 times. So if it does hit and you are right, you wind up moving 10 or 15 rosters onto the second day. And basically the idea behind it is at that point, then you can start splitting it up a little. Maybe you make 3 different teams of 5 if you had 15 rosters. Or maybe you make a team and put it in 7 times and make another team and put it in 8 times. And the idea is that, both rosters could advance, but what you're doing is giving yourself 2 chances in a 50-50 to go different ways, maybe different pitching options or a different group of bats that you wanted to target. And it lets you move on to the 3rd day having more than 1 chance alive. So if you get your 15 through on the first day, if you run a train, and then you split it in half and you get 7 or 8 through to the second day, Well, if you split it in half again, then you're going to wind up, if you get in there, you're going to wind up moving 3 or 4 rosters on. That means that going into that last day, that GPP, where most people might only have 1 or 2 chances left to, go different ways in their tournament for the last day for the big money. If you have 4 or 5 chances left, you can play it more like a multi-entry GPP that you have. So if you have 5 entries going into the last day, instead of having to be safe and conservative, trying to make sure you get a roster of guys with upside, you can take more chances, which is usually something that pays off in tournaments. If you get 4 or 5 of those entries through to the last day, well, now you can stack 2 or 3 different teams, put 2 or 3 different sets of pitchers on top of them. It gives yourself a lot of options that you can go with to really give you a chance to get to that big money. Like we said, the Survivor style is the first 3 days, you're basically playing a 50-50 for the right to be able to play in that big tournament at the end of the week for the end of the Survivor, where you can make a real big score. So again, that's a strategy that a lot of people use running trains. The other strategy, if you're somebody who just wants to have a chance, a chip in a chair, as they say on the last day, well, then maybe you run 4 or 5 different lineups and put 4 or 5 different lineups into the second round. Then if you get 2 or 3 or 4 of those into the second round, you do the same thing. You run 3 or 4 different lineups, and you hope that you get 1 or 2 of them through to the third round. And basically with a strategy like this, you're going to notice that every round you're going to be losing at least a couple of those entries. If you're making differentiated entries, some of those entries are not going to make it to the 50-50 cash line. The upside is that you will at least get maybe 1 or 2 of them to move on and give yourself a chance to play for that big money on the last day. But the downside is you're probably going to get to the last day with at most 1 or 2 bullets. So if you are someone who wants to play in the Survivor, basically you have to decide for yourself, am I somebody who's looking to get to the last day and have a chip in a chair and, hopefully a chance to, cash and make a little bit of money back? Or am I somebody who wants to take a chance and win this tournament? If you want to take a chance to win this tournament, you basically have to run a big train in the first round and hope you can sneak it through. And then in the second and third round, you still got to have trains that are big enough that if you do get it through, you have a bunch of options. Think about how many options you want on your last day and then basically double it on the way out. If you want to have 5 entries live on the last day, you probably need to have 10 going into day 3, 20 going into day 2, which would mean that you probably have to put in 20 roster train today and get it through to the second round if that's the way you want to try to play it. Like I said, it's not an easy thing to do. You could lose a lot of money if all 20 of those fall flat on their face. But again, if you can get into the last round with 4 or 5 of those left, you're going to have a huge advantage over the field and be in a really good spot to make a big score. So that's how I'm going to be attacking the Survivor tournament. Like I said, I have 10 entries now. I may take a couple more, that I'll have to pay for with cash. But I'm going to be trying to run a couple small trains, and I might put together a 5 or, using some cash and seeing if I can get that through to the second or third round. And then, try to end up on the last day with a couple options. This way we can stack a couple teams, put in a couple different combinations of pitchers, and hopefully go after that big $30,000 score. So that's just our teaching point for today, a little bit about how to play Survivors. Let's move on and talk a little bit about the recap of yesterday and get into today's action. Let's see. The big thing yesterday, the elephant in the room is Michael Pineda's start. Now, I'm not going to get into it. It was horrible. Everybody knows that. But here's the point I wanted to make on it to you guys. If you do your research and you look at the numbers, you're going to come up with Michael Pineda probably 50 times out of 50 in that same spot. He was a -270 favorite in Vegas, going up against a Phillies team that hasn't been hitting all that well. Pineda's been pitching pretty well. He was at home. Everything, all the boxes checked off. Everything was going in his favor. He just had a bad start, and that will happen sometimes in baseball. That's something that we can't control. We've actually seen it quite a bit this year. We've had people complaining all the time, and we've been on that same boat. I recommended Pineda yesterday. Obviously, I was dead wrong, as were about 60% of people in tournaments, closer to 80% of people in cash games. It was a very, very bad start. But the point that I want to make to you guys is you have to trust in the process that you're using. If you look at the numbers and the numbers are pointing to a guy and, he's the biggest favorite, Vegas is saying he's the biggest favorite, the numbers, his pitching numbers are saying he should have a good game. The numbers of the team he's going against say he should have a good game. When everything is going in that favor, more often than not, that situation is going to pay off. So don't let the fact that everything was going into Pineda's favor yesterday and he went out there and threw a horrible start push you off of the top options that you wind up getting with on the same day. You have to trust your process. You have to realize that stuff like that is going to happen. But as long as you're doing the work and putting in the work and picking the guys that are in the best spots every day, over the long haul, you're going to wind up profitable. And that's the idea, is You might lose on a day here, you might lose on a day there. But that's why we talk to you guys about bankroll management and say keep 5 to 8, 10% at most of your bankroll in play on any given day, because stuff like this does happen. Baseball on paper is one thing, but when they actually go out there and play the games, it doesn't always work out the way that we think it will. And that's a good point to realize for you guys, that trust in your process, trust with what you're doing. If Pineda's in that same situation again next week, you take him. You don't shy away from him, because he was one of the best plays. If everything checks out and they say that he's fine and there's nothing physically wrong with him, he just had a bad start. I mean, we've all had a bad day. You've gotten to work and just, completely messed up a project you were working on, completely did something wrong. Maybe you forgot your keys, you forgot your wallet. I mean, stuff like that happens. We're all human. So keep trusting in your process and keep going. But obviously, Pineda having a bad day yesterday sank a lot of people's rosters within the first 30 minutes after lineup lock. The guy who wound up being the best pitcher on the day was Joe Blanton. And I got to be honest, I didn't see it coming. I wasn't on him. I didn't like him. I didn't talk about him. I said he's a guy who might be able to reach value because he was only about 4,000, but he put up almost 30 points on DraftKings last night. I think he might have even been the highest scoring pitcher on the evening. He was very low owned, and if you were one of the people that had him, I didn't see too many people at all that had him in cash, but there was definitely a bunch of people that had him in tournaments, on tournament rosters. When all the pitching blew up yesterday, he was definitely the guy you wanted. Kershaw had a decent game. He had 24. Hector Santiago had 17. But, I mean, everybody else pretty much was horrible. You got minus 15 out of Pineda. I think you got 11 points out of Felix Hernandez. You got 10 points out of Tommy Malone, who was somebody that everybody was talking about, who we talked about over here. He didn't give up a lot of runs, but he also really didn't have a great start. He did give up a lot of base runners, didn't strike a lot of guys out. He was cheap, so it wasn't a horrendous return. You see a couple guys with top 25 rosters in the big 250K swing for the fence and some of the other tournaments around the industry. He was pretty highly owned. There were a couple people who were able to sneak in some rosters with him and Kershaw or him and Blanton. But I mean, for the most part, he didn't have a great start either. So pitching yesterday wasn't really what you needed. When you look at the top rosters yesterday, you saw a lot of Philadelphia bats. You saw a lot of New York Yankees bats. That Yankees-Phillies games had 19 runs total, and was basically the one where you saw everybody getting all their, all their fantasy points from. You had Maikel Franco hit 2 home runs. You had Brett Gardner finish with 31 DraftKings points, I think. Racked up a couple hits. I think he had a stolen base, a walk, a couple runs scored. You had a bunch of other guys. McCann hit a home run. He had 17. You had a whole bunch of guys from both sides. Ben Revere. Let's see, who else did we have there? But there was a whole bunch of guys that finished with double-digit points out of that game. But if you look at the top 10 rosters, you're going to see, I think it was 8 of the 10 had at least 5 guys that played in that game on them. And even the other ones that didn't have 5 guys, they had Maikel Franco or they had Brett Gardner. Everybody who had a top 10 roster yesterday had some exposure there. So when you get a blow up like that, in chat before we were talking about it, and someone said, what's the most contrarian stack for a tournament? And basically, if you want to find the most contrarian stack, like I said to him yesterday, is look for who the highest owned pitcher is going to be. Most people won't take bats against the pitcher that they're facing. So if you think that somebody like Pineda yesterday was going to be 50, 60% owned like he was, well, then the biggest contrarian stack was taking the Phillies. And if you did it yesterday, there's a good chance that you probably wound up winning some money. Who else do we have? We had Pujols go double dong again yesterday. He's on fire. We're going to talk about him in a minute. Gardner had a solid game. Logan Forsythe had a home run and 2 stolen bases. He finished with 31 DraftKings points. Now, he's a guy I usually like to play against left-handed pitching, but he had a pretty good day yesterday against a right-hander too. So he was somebody that was pretty cheap. I think he has multi-position eligibility. I think DraftKings actually changed him. He used to be second and third base. I think he's first and second base now. But if you're looking for a cheap option, he's somebody you can fit in. He bats in the middle of that Tampa Bay order. And like I said, I usually like him more against lefties, but I use him a lot. If you're not on this guy or you haven't been using him this year, you really need to start taking a look at him because his price is too cheap for the upside that he can give you. So that basically wraps up yesterday's recap. Let's go on and talk about today. There are 2 games I want to mention real quick. That Baltimore and Boston game and the Atlanta at Washington game. There's some rain expected on the East Coast today. Tune in later to @WeatherDFS on Twitter or come back here to the RotoCurve site about 5:30. Our in-house meteorologist, Danielle Kozlowski, will be posting her her reports, give you guys the weather maps so you have a chance to take a look at that and see if you can be on some of those guys or off some of those guys. I haven't really looked at too many of them, too many guys from that game so far in my early analysis. But again, if you're on some of those pitchers as your cheap value guys, it might be something that you want to keep in mind. So let's talk about the Vegas lines today. First thing that just jumped off the page to me is that Cincinnati and Pittsburgh game. It's a matchup between Joe Smith and Jeff Locke. Now, here's why it jumped off the page. It opened with Cincy at -117 and 7 runs. And since has moved to Pittsburgh -135 and 8 runs. So you're getting an extra run on the run line. And Locke went from being a +110 underdog to being a -135 favorite. So to me, that says that they're expecting Pittsburgh to have a pretty good game here. The fact that the line moved up, the run line moved up, also means they're expecting to see some runs here. So I didn't really look at a lot of those bats on the Pittsburgh team early, and I didn't look too much at Smith at all to be somebody who I was like heavily going to target against. But when I get off the show here, and I think what you guys should do is kind of take a look at Smith, see what you can find out about this guy, and see if there are any bats on that Pittsburgh team that you think would make good targets against them. Because basically Vegas in the last basically hour and a half has shown us that they're thinking that there's something going on in that game. That's a very big line move. So whenever I see a big line move, it's usually a red flag, and you want to pay attention to it. Moving on from there, we have Strasburg is coming back today. So if you're a Steven Strasburg fan, he's supposed to pitch today. Remember, there is some weather concerns with that game, Atlanta against Washington down in Washington. Strasburg is being put in as a -155 favorite versus Atlanta. I am not touching him today. He's down to 9K, which is kind of cheap. But think about it. Atlanta's a team that doesn't strike out a ton and actually hits pretty well against right-handed pitching. They got a lot of lefty bats in that lineup. Freddie Freeman was out the other day, so just make sure that he's back in because he's one of the biggest bats that they have. If he's not in, you wind up with guys like Kelly Johnson hitting cleanup. If that's the case, then maybe Strasburg would be worth a flyer in some of your tournaments today. But until I see him pitch and until I see that he's back to the guy, not even the guy earlier this year, I want the guy from like a year or two ago. If he gets back to that level, then I think he's somebody that you can put in play. But I'm going to take a wait-and-see approach on him today. Again, if you want to use him as a flyer in a tournament, hoping that he is on point today, I'm not going to knock you for it. But it's just remember that this guy's been really, really bad this year. If he was like $7,000, maybe $75,000, I would consider it. But for $9,000 over on DraftKings, I don't think it's worth it. I didn't see his price in the other sites today. I was doing most of my research over on the DraftKings site this morning. But unless he's cheap, I don't think he's even worth inclusion for you. So moving on from there, let's look at, there's a game in Arizona today. So Arizona, Colorado, they're expecting 11 runs. Again, when there's a game in Coors Field, you need to have some exposure to the Coors Field. It's a given. There's no way around it. There's no way you can say, oh, I'm just going to fade this game. They're expecting 11 runs. There's going to be some runs scored. There's probably going to be a lot of hits. There's going to be a couple home runs. There's going to be some guys in double-digit scoring range. What I like to do when there's a game at Coors Field, even if there aren't guys, expensive options that I want to target, I definitely think that you can look at some of the cheap options at tough-to-fill positions. Catcher, second base, and shortstop are usually 3 of the positions where you can find some cheap bats that can outperform. Basically because the top guys over there are few and far between. So if you're looking to fill a punt in one of those positions today, or even a punt in one of your outfield spots today, if there's any cheap guys in the lineup in a good lineup spot today from either one of these teams, I think both sides are in play. Vegas expects this game to be kind of close, so they're expecting 4 or 5 runs at a minimum from both teams. One of them will probably get 6 or 7 based on what Vegas thinks. So, if you're going to see that many runs in a game, you need to have some exposure to it. The last thing I wanted to point out is some of the starting pitchers. A couple things that popped out to me. Archer against Toronto, only 7 runs expected in that game. He's going up against R.A. Dickey. I thought the run line was a little bit low there. Vegas must really, really like Archer today. It's going to be tough. We'll talk about it in a minute. Toronto's offense is really good. Obviously, they do a little bit better against left-handers, but, they're still good against righties. They've been smashing too. So I don't think it's something that you got to really completely shy away from. Chavez versus Chichi. Oakland went from being a -115 favorite to a -135 favorite, and the run line moved from 9.5 down to 8.5. So I think Vegas is giving a little bit more respect to Jesse Chavez. Excuse me, a little bit more respect to Jesse Chavez lately, and that's something that you should consider. Chavez had a really big game last time out, and we'll talk about him when we get to the starting pitchers in a minute. The last guy I want to mention, and also one of the first guys I'm going to talk about when we get to starting pitchers, is Carlos Martinez. Martinez is a minus 140 favorite today in a game with a 7-run total going up against Miami. So starting pitcher is a little bit tough today, and I'm going to tell you why. Martinez, I think, is probably going to be my number one on the day. But before I tell you why Martinez is my number one, let me give you a reason why I don't like some of the guys above him. David Price goes up against Cleveland. Cleveland surprisingly hits left-handed pitching very well for a team that is pretty lefty dominant. They're in the top 10 for batting average against left-handed pitching, and they're in the bottom 20 for strikeouts. So you got a team that doesn't strike out a lot and a team that has a pretty high batting average going up against a left-handed pitching. While I do like Price, again, he's been blown up a couple times this year. Hasn't really been throwing like absolute gems where he's going very high up and getting, scores into the 30s and 40s. I think he's done it into the 30s a couple times, but again, he hasn't been very consistent with it this year. Sometimes he gets blown up, and when he does get blown up, it's usually early. If you get to Price, you usually have to get to him in the first or second inning. Once he settles down by like the third and fourth inning, he's usually pretty tough to get to until they take him out of the game. So I think that Price is somebody today who, if he wasn't so pricey, you might be able to use him. But I think he's pretty expensive on most of the sites where I'm going to be shying away from him. Greinke is the second guy up there. Now, Greinke has the high strikeout potential going up against a team that strikes out a lot. So that's a good situation for Greinke. But that Chicago team also is able to hit the ball, and they can put up a lot of runs in a hurry. So on top of the fact that Greinke has the strikeout potential, he also has the potential to give up a couple runs. If he gives up a walk or a hit, that Cubs team has power basically throughout that order at this point. So any guy in that order could wind up taking him yard. And if any one of those guys take him yard, you're going to wind up getting the negative of two or three runs, which is going to be like a negative of 6 on DraftKings or -3 on FanDuel, some of the other sites like Aces that we play on. Basically, here's my other drawback with Greinke. Greinke's been a high strikeout guy, and he's been striking a lot of guys out this season, but he hasn't been pitching all that deep into the game. He's not a guy who's going to give you 8 innings and 12 or 13 strikeouts. He might give you 5 or 6 innings with 10 or 11 strikeouts, or he might go 7 or 8 innings with 7 or 8 strikeouts. But he rarely is a guy who gives you the 7 or 8 innings with the 10-plus strikeout kind of performance. He's usually either high strikeouts and out before the 7th, or when his strikeouts are down and he's getting ground balls, he can pitch into the 7th or 8th. But again, he usually does it by sacrificing strikeouts and pitching a little more to contact and ending up with, maybe a strikeout per inning as opposed to more than a strikeout per inning as he does in some of his shorter starts. I do think he has upside. I don't think he's horrendous, but I think it's very risky, and I think it's somebody that I would stay away from in cash. If you look at his scores, though, he basically gets you between 22 and 28 points in just about every one of his starts, and he's done it consistent enough to make me think that he could do it today. But again, at a price above 10K, 22 to 28 points is only 2 to 2.5 points per $1,000 of cost over on DraftKings. And even over on FanDuel, I don't think he's going to get you up to 19 or 20 where you really need. He's probably going to finish somewhere in the 14, 15 range, which is good, but not great. So if there's a chance that he gets lit up too and the Cubs get to him, or he doesn't get a win, if they get to the bullpen in the end, if he doesn't get that win at his price, he's definitely not going to pay it off for you. Archer's going up against Toronto. Like I said, Vegas likes him more than I do. I thought that line was a little low. Toronto usually is somebody we target against lefties, but even against right-handed pitches, this team has been mashing this year. I know it's in Tampa Bay, which is not the same as playing in the Rogers Center, but, with a guy like Reyes healthy now and on top of that order, they have guys basically 1 through 4 in that order that are all-star caliber, and then guys like 5 through 8 who have all been playing above their heads this season. Guys like Pilar, guys like, even like a Russ Martin who's been great. Colabello. Those guys are all very solid, very professional hitters. Even Ryan Goins has been putting up 20 points, over the last week or so. So that's not an easy lineup Archer's going up against. Again, I like Archer, but we also have him in our head as that guy that was putting up 40 points, which I think was a little above his average in the past week or two. So I think he's coming back down to a guy who's in the mid-20s, which is still very good. But at the price they're asking today, it's a little bit too pricey. The other guy is Salazar, who's going up against Detroit. I don't like this matchup for him at all. Detroit has the second highest batting average against right-handed pitching, and Salazar is very erratic. So I don't think that he's somebody who I'm going to consider at all. That basically leaves 2 guys up towards the high end that I think you can play today. The first one is Carlos Martinez. Martinez is going up against the Marlins. If you look at his game log, he has a 2.80 ERA, a 1.22 WHIP, and he has 83 strikeouts and 79 innings of work. Now, he's basically been averaging 25 points per start over his last 7. Now, at the price he's at today on DraftKings, about 8,400, 25 points is about what you need out of this guy. The Marlins team that he faces, they're somewhere in the middle of the pack for batting average. They haven't been hitting it well because they were a little bit closer to the top end, and they do have a pretty high strikeout rate in the top 10 for K percentage against right-handed pitching. So it's a place where Martinez can get some strikeouts, and he's a high strikeout pitcher. And it's also a team that's been struggling lately, going up against a pitcher who's been pretty good. So I definitely think, and it's in a good ballpark. So there's a lot of things that are going in his favor today. Again, I like the fact that there's a price break that you get on him versus some of the guys up top. And as you look down the list, I think he has probably the easiest matchup of anybody in the top 10, let's say, for starting pitchers. And with a price at only 8,400, he's friendly enough to allow you to fit in some of the big bats today, because there are a lot of big bats that you're going to want to be putting in your lineup. To me, the second guy that I think is useful, mostly for cash games, because I'm going to be shying away from him in tournaments, is Madison Bumgarner. Bumgarner goes up against a San Diego team that is in the bottom third for batting average against left-handed pitching and is in the top third for strikeouts against left-handed pitchers. Bumgarner has been very good lately, but the problem for me is he's really only flashed a ceiling of about 30 points in 3 of his last 10 starts. With the price that he's at today, about 11,200 on DraftKings, you really need him to get you 34 points, basically just to give him the value that you want out of him. And there are some other pitchers who are up there at that same price range that people are going to use, so I think he'll be low owned, so that's a good thing. But like I said, he's more of a cash game play for me, or if you're playing in the Survivor tonight over on DraftKings, I think he's somebody you can definitely roll out. I think he's safe for about 20 to 25 points tonight, which is not a bad return, but it's not a great return for what they're expecting you to pay for him. Again, I wouldn't use him in tournaments tonight. I don't see him being a guy who's going to get you 40 points, even though that San Diego offense has struggled. They started the season hot, but lately they've basically just not been hitting the ball at all. And the game is in San Francisco, which is a great pitcher's park. Bumgarner is a minus 170 favorite right now. The run line on that game is 6.5, and I definitely think it's somewhere that you should be looking tonight. So the 2 guys that I would be willing to pay up for in spots, depending on where you're playing, are pretty much Bumgarner and Carlos Martinez. I actually really like that combination and the price points that they're at over on Fantasy Aces. I think you're still able to build a pretty solid team if you put Martinez and Bumgarner in over there, and you're giving yourself a little more upside on the site like Aces at his price than you have over at DraftKings. At DraftKings, I think he's a little too expensive for you. The one cheap option who I like today, and I think I'm going to be rolling out in spots, is going to be Jesse Chavez. I'm still trying to decide whether or not I think he's cash game safe, but right now I do actually have him in cash games over on DraftKings. He's got great numbers this year. 252 whip. I'm sorry, 252 ERA, 1.09 whip, 70 strikeouts in 78 innings. Last time out, he's flashed 35-point upside. He had 35 DK points last time. He's had other games where he's gotten 29, 21, 31, and his price today is only 6,600. So you really only need to get about 20 points out of him. Texas does have a lot of really good left-handed bats that they can throw at him, but that Texas offense has been up and down lately. They're very erratic. They too were a team that got hot about a month ago, earlier in the month, and since then has really cooled off. They brought up a couple rookies. They're mixing a couple guys in there. You know, guys like Gallo and Rognan Odor back in those lineups. They're both been pretty solid lately. A guy like Fielder can hit, Moreland can hit, but I still think that Chavez is pretty underpriced. I don't expect him to go out there and have a 30-point game, but I think he can get you close to 20, and at his price of 6,600, that's basically the value that you need. I also really like him today because you can pair him up with a guy like Carlos Martinez, and you're basically only spending about $15K on your pitching or 30% of your salary cap, and it gives you about $35K to go and get 8 bats. And there are some really hot bats tonight, really expensive bats that you want to fit into your lineup tonight that we'll get into. As far as GPP options go, I think you can look at a guy like Mike Fiers against the New York Mets. Fiers is feast or famine. He can go out there and get you 20 to 30 DraftKings points, strike out 7 or 8 guys over 5 or 6 innings. And he can go out there and go 5 innings and wind up with -5 and give up 6 or 7 runs on 3 or 4 walks and a home run ball or 2. So for me, he's only a GPP option, but I definitely think that strikeout upside is somebody that something that makes him one of the guys that's in play. Another guy that I think is going to be sneaky, low owned, and also could be somebody who helps you win a tournament, but I would only use him in a tournament, is Jeff Samardzija. He's been pitching better lately, going about 7 innings, getting about 7 strikeouts, and he only has 1 walk over his last 2 games. The problem is he's been giving up a ton of hits. He's given up about 15 hits over the last 2 games, and he's going to need to limit those hits if he's going to really have a chance to not get blown up today. Minnesota does not have a great batting average against right-handed pitching, so I think he might be able to limit those hits. And they're a team that we usually like to target against lefties, coming off a big day yesterday where they faced the lefty coming up. But I don't think that Samardzija is somebody who I would completely shy away from in tournaments, but I definitely wouldn't use him in cash games. Obviously, he hasn't been returning value, and he has been blown up a couple times in recent games. So that's pretty much my ideas on pitching tonight. So let's get into some of the hitters that I think you can use. All right, the guy who's in the best spot to me at catcher is easily Brian McCann. The problem is he's very expensive. He's $4,800 over on DraftKings. Goes up against Sean O'Sullivan. O'Sullivan has given up an absolute ton of home runs to left-handed batters. They're in Yankee Stadium, great hitters park for lefties. I mean, there's nothing wrong with this matchup. The only question that I'm going to ask you guys or pose to you guys is, are you willing to pay up $4,800 for Brian McCann? If the answer that you have to that is yes, what you have to realize is that means you're probably going to be giving up on getting some of the other studs that play at other positions. You're definitely not going to be able to fit McCann and a guy like Goldie at $6,000 into your lineup. You're probably not going to be able to fit in a Todd Frazier all that easy. You're going to wind up having to take some really cheap punt-type options if you're going to try to fit a McCann into your lineup today. The way I'm getting around this is for 25% less on DraftKings, for only $3,600, you can have Jonathan Lucroy. Lucroy is a guy who hit over 300 last year against left-handed pitching, and he's going up against Jonathan Neese at home in Miller Park, which is a really good hitter's park. So you're going to get a guy like Lucroy, who's probably going to be, much lower owned, I think, against a guy like Neese, who's not a very good pitcher. Granted, he's been okay lately, but overall, he's not a very good pitcher. So you're going to be getting Lucroy in his preferred splits matchup at home, likely hitting second in front of guys like Ryan Braun in that lineup, or maybe even third, which puts him in more of an RBI spot. I definitely think at $3,600 that Lucroy is a little underpriced on DraftKings. So he's a guy I'm going to be rolling out in my cash games. If you can fit McCann in a tournament, he might have more upside because he probably has a better chance for a home run. Lucroy is not a big home run hitter, but he is a really good average hitter. So he's a guy who could rack up 2 or 3 hits for you, score a run or 2, get a couple RBIs. At $3,600, I just think that's too good a price to pass up on Lucroy, and he's definitely somebody you should have on your radars. Now, moving on to first base, there's 2 options today. Paul Goldschmidt is a stud, all right? I'm not even going to go into his numbers. He goes up against Kyle Kendrick today. Kendrick, I'm not going to go into his numbers either, but basically Kendrick's not a very good pitcher. Goldie's one of the best hitters in the league. Now, the other thing is Goldie's one of the best fantasy players, period, in the league, because on top of that high average that he has, on top of the home runs that he hits, on top of all the RBIs that he hits, this guy probably also has the most stolen bases of any first baseman right now. And he steals bases like he's a small, fast guy. I mean, you can't believe how big and strong this guy is, and also how fast he is and how many bases that he steals. He can legitimately fill up every single stat in the stat sheet for you. He's a guy who can have a home run, 4 RBIs, 3 runs scored, 3 hits, and a stolen base. And when you add all that stuff up together, you wind up with scores in the high 20s, low 30s. And I mean, we have seen that out of Goldie so far this year. Now, again, he's hitting in Coors Field. He's going up against Kyle Kendrick. There is absolutely nothing I'm going to tell you that says you shouldn't play Goldie today, except for the fact that his price is $6,000 on DraftKings. His price on FanDuel is up in the 5s, and he's maximum price over on Aces. Now, on Aces, it's not that bad because I think he's only $6,000. I don't think there's anybody above $6,000. And at $6,000, that's basically what he has been over the past couple games when he hasn't been playing in Coors Field. So it's not easy to fit him in, but I think he's somebody on Aces that you can look at. On DraftKings, though, if you really want Goldie in your lineup, you're basically guaranteeing yourself to punt at least one position, probably not get any of the top-end starters, and still will not really have a lot of other upside, high-priced guys in your lineup. Rostering him today is very restrictive. He's going to take up, he takes up about 12%, maybe 13%, and that's a lot to put into one hitter. But again, the matchup is amazing. So what you really have to figure out for yourself is, once lineups come out, is there enough value today that you can fit this guy in your lineup? If your answer is yes, then I think you should put him in. He should be the guy who scores. He has the best projection. He has the safest floor, and he should be the guy who scores the most points at the position. If you need somebody cheaper, and I am going cheaper in all my cash game lineups, I'm going with Albert Pujols. All right, Pujols takes on Colin McHugh today. McHugh has allowed 8 home runs in his last 5 games. Pujols is a guy who has 6 homers in his last 10 games, including 2 more that he hit last night. He had 1 the other day, and he had 1 3 games ago. So I think right now he has 4 in his last 5 games, if I'm not mistaken, and he has 6 in his last 10 overall. In his last 10 games, Pujols has averaged 13.9 fantasy points. I mean, he's hitting the ball, he's driving in runs, he's hitting it for power. There's really not much you can say about him. He's at a much friendlier price point than Goldie today. He's only 4,400 over on DraftKings. So with Goldie being 6,000, I think you can basically come down to a guy like Pujols. You're saving almost 25% off the salary that he is. Actually, more than 25% off the salary that he is, and you're still giving yourself some pretty good upside. So if you're playing in cash games, I definitely think that you want to look Pujols' way. If you can fit Goldie in because you find some nice punts when lineups come out, obviously I'm not going to argue with it. He's somebody who projects as somebody who should be a big stud today. Second base, there's 2 guys I'm looking at. The expensive option that I like is Ben Zobrist. The problem is his price has really come up. His last couple games, he's been absolutely smashing the ball. He's averaging over 10 DraftKings points a game over his last 7. He's put up some big scores. He's had some home runs, finds himself back in the middle of that A's order. And I think he has a pretty good matchup today. He actually goes up against Chichi Gonzalez. Gonzalez doesn't strike anybody out, but he also hasn't really given up a ton of hits and walks and runs. So if Zobrist was cheaper, he would definitely be my first option. But he's the most expensive second baseman on the board on DraftKings. He's up a little bit higher on FanDuel, but I don't think he's the most expensive. But I definitely think that he probably has the most upside. So if you're going cheap in other spots and you can pay up for him, I think you can. But if you need a cheaper option today, and I don't want to be crucified for this, but the numbers are pointing them out to me again, and I think today is going to be the last chance I give him. And that cheap guy is going to be Robinson Cano. Over on DraftKings, he's only 3,600. And basically, the good news is that he's starting to hit a little bit. He's averaging just shy of 10 DraftKings points a game over his last 4. And here's the kicker today. He goes up against Jeremy Guthrie. If there's anything we know about Jeremy Guthrie, it's that Jeremy Guthrie cannot pitch to left-handed batters. Left-handed batters absolutely own him. So Cano is starting to show some signs of life. And if he is ever going to be a guy that I use again for the rest of the season, this is probably the best possible matchup you could ask for. If you're looking for a matchup to break out of a slump as a left-handed batter, you're basically hoping that Jeremy Guthrie is going to be somebody on the mound against you pretty soon. So, like I said, I mean, Cano has burned us all season long. The guy doesn't look right. He hasn't been good, but he's starting to hit a little bit. He's very cheap, and he has the absolute perfect matchup. So if you're looking for a second baseman cheap option to fit in some of these guys today, Robinson Cano is somebody I'm used. I would even go so far as to say that this matchup is so good that I have him in my cash game lineup, which I know I'm going to be ridiculed for in chat as I say that right now. But you know what? I just have a good feeling about him today. I don't blame anybody who doesn't follow me on that one, but I think that all the numbers are pointed in his direction, and he should be somebody who does more than ground out to second base 3 times and get into a double play or 2 today. Moving on to third base, Todd Frazier has been absolutely on fire. One of the hottest hitters in baseball, 140 fantasy points on DraftKings over his last 9 games. That's just absolutely astounding. He has 3 or 4 games with 20 points, another 2 games where he got to 30. Basically, this guy has just been an absolute stud. He has a pretty good matchup today, gets the right splits going up against Jeff Locke. The problem is they do play in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is a tough park to hit home runs in. Definitely a pitcher's park, definitely favors pitchers in that place. And obviously, Frazier's price is really high. You can use him at first base or third base over on DraftKings if there's somebody that you like at either one of those positions that you want to pair him up with. Again, the problem that you have with using a guy like Frazier is you really need him to be your favorite stud on the day, and you really need him to go home run, because using a guy like a Frazier or a McCann or any of these other guys that are up around 5,000 today likely means that you're only going to be able to get 1 or 2 of them in. So you really have to hit on which 1 or 2 of those expensive options you decide to put in your roster today. Otherwise, you're not going to get anywhere with it. If you're looking for a cheap option at third base, I think Jake Lamb is somebody who's in play today. He got a little bit of a price bump moving over to Coors. But again, he's a lefty batter. He's been finding himself hitting in the 2-hole on occasions for Arizona, where I think they'll find him today. And he has that same matchup we talked about going up against Kyle Kendrick. Now, at the beginning of the season, this guy started out red hot. He was somebody that was one of the cheap options that is helping people win tournaments. and then he got injured, was out for a couple months, and just came back a week or two ago. So he's still rounding back into shape, but I definitely think he's somebody who could be in play today. Just make sure that he's in the lineup. They've been sharing third base duties with him, guys like Yasmani Tomas. And, sometimes they're one or the other plays the outfield. The other one plays third base. They've been in there together. But again, I think he's going to be a little bit cheaper, gives you some exposure to that Coors Field game, and definitely has some really good upside going up against Kendrick. I really only have one shortstop that I like today, and it's somebody I've been rolling out a lot. Over on DraftKings, I think his price is cheap, below $4,000. I'm not sold on this Chichi Gonzalez guy being a stud. His numbers kind of point to some regression coming in the near future. Doesn't strike out a lot of guys. Basically, he's been giving up a couple hits, but he has a low batting average on balls in play. There's just a lot of things that say that this might be a little bit of a mirage. So Correa has been an absolute stud. He's averaged about 10 fantasy points over his last 9 games. Put up a couple games where he's gotten 23, 26 on DraftKings lately. He has home run upside, which is something you can't say about a lot of shortstops. And he's under 4,000 on DraftKings. So relative for the position, he's a little expensive, but relative to what you get for 3,900 at other positions, if you were to take a guy at that price point at other positions and pay up for like a Hanley or a Tulo, I think you get more value by taking him as a $3,900 guy than you do by going over and taking some of the $3,900 outfielders or the $3,900 first baseman. I think you're just giving up a little bit too much upside at other positions. And I really am not a huge fan of either Hanley or Tulo today. So there's nobody at shortstop I really think you need to pay up for. Basically, I think Correa is that guy that you want to be, putting your situation on overall. Moving on to the outfield. There are 3 outfielders that I really like today and a couple cheap options I'll throw you at the end. Ryan Braun has not been hitting all that well, but he does have 17 and 23 DraftKings points in 2 of his last 3 games and gets a pretty easy matchup today. He's going up against Jonathan Nice. Nice has been pitching decently, but he's not a very good pitcher. They moved that game over to Miller Park, so he's not at home in Citi Field where he's been pitching pretty well. He goes into a hitter's ballpark. He's a left-handed pitcher. Braun's been hitting pretty well against right-handers. I definitely think that Braun is another guy that you can use. I'm picking on Nice a little bit today with guys like Lucroy and Braun. And I even think that for those of you who like to, throw some stacks into some of these tournaments, I think a Milwaukee stack against Nice today at home in Miller Park is something that you might want to look into. I don't know all the prices. I do know that Lucroy is only 3,600 on DraftKings. Braun is only 4,400. So I think you can put together a Milwaukee stack with those being probably 2 of the biggest bats at pretty cheap price and still save some money to get some guys at some of the other positions that you want to throw in there. The second guy, the other 2 guys who I like in the outfield, guys who I've been using in a lot of my cash games already today, are AJ Pollock and Charlie Blackmon. Now, Pollock is going up in that. He's another one. He's in that Coors Field game going up against Kendrick. So there's, basically I'm not going to rehash all those things. Pollock is hitting 296 this year against right-handed pitching with 7 home runs and about 200 at-bats. He either hits in front of or behind Goldschmidt, and he's been a guy who's been driving in runs. He's been pretty good. He's been really solid. And again, he gets the park bump moving over to Colorado. Vegas expects a ton of runs in that game. And Pollock's price is up in spots. I know on DraftKings he's a little expensive. Again, I don't know if I'd pay $4,800 for him on DraftKings, but on some of the other sites that you're playing where you can get him a little bit cheaper at a discount, over on Aces, I think I have him in my Aces lineup that I made already. So he's definitely somebody I think is in play over there. The last guy, like I said, is Charlie Blackmon. Now, Blackmon is a left-handed batter going up against the righty Chase Anderson for Arizona. He plays in that game at Coors as well. Anderson has actually been pretty good, but again, this is Coors Field, so everybody's numbers are worse in Coors Field. Clayton Kershaw doesn't even have good starts in Coors Field, so I'm not expecting Chase Anderson to go out there and throw a gem today. Let's see. We got Blackmon leading off, and he's another one of those guys that can fill up a stat sheet. He's able to get you stolen bases, home runs, hits, and runs, and his price is another one that's come up. He's about $5,000. But he actually has been backing it up lately. He's been averaging 13 fantasy points per game over his last 6. So he's definitely somebody who I think is in play. I also think he's going to go very low owned, other than the people who are stacking Colorado or stacking Arizona and taking him as one of the lefty bats from the other side. I don't think too many people are going to be on him because I think people are going to spend up. They're going to see the price tag and they're going to want to spend up elsewhere to get, guys at other positions or even some other outfielders in there today. So that basically sums up all the guys, all the hitters I wanted to talk to you about today. Let me give you an idea of how I'm building some of my rosters. Carlos Martinez is my starting pitcher for a lot of one pitcher sites tonight. I just think that his price discount and the upside that he has is just too good. Overall, he's the best guy with the best combination of all that stuff. He's one of my pitchers on most of my DraftKings and Fantasy Aces lineups, also over at Fantasy Score. Over on DraftKings, I have lineups where he's my SP1, the expensive guy, and lineups where he's my SP2. So I think you can try to attack it both ways. But like I said, I have a lot of exposure to him today. I think he's going to be highly owned. If you want the GPP swerves, I think if you look at a guy like Fires or a guy like Samardzija, who are basically the same price as Martinez, I think Martinez is going to suck up a lot of the action at that price range. And those guys might go lower owned for you and do have a little bit of upside. Madison Bumgarner, another guy I would only use in cash. Chavez is the other guy who I think I might be rolling out there in some of the tournament options today. I love Goldie today. I absolutely love him. I think he's one of the best players, but I think he's too expensive for you to use. I do think that his price being so expensive is going to keep his ownership lower than you would expect it to be with Goldie playing in cores. So I do think he might be a decent option to use in tournaments. Again, first base is another position where there's always so many options, that there's always so many people spread out. So you never really get one first baseman that's very, very highly owned. But again, if Goldie's price was only $5,000 today, I think he would be 30-40% owned. So I'm actually kind of glad that DraftKings jacked it up a little bit. I'm going to be using a lot of Pujols. I think Pujols is a guy who is absolutely on fire right now. Like I said, I really like that matchup for guys like Braun and Lucroy. I also really like their price on a site like DraftKings. Again, if you can't fit in a Goldie, but if you go with a guy like a Lucroy, a guy like a Braun, and a guy like an Albert Pujols as three guys in your cash game lineup to start, you're going to be able to fit in some pretty good pitching and not have to take too many cheap bats. Or if you go the route of, maybe like a Jesse Chavez and a Carlos Martinez with those three guys, you're going to actually have a lot of money where you can go and get some of the more expensive options, like a Frazier, like a Zobrist at second base. Again, if you really like a Tulo or a Hanley, I would still rather stay with Correa. But you will be able to get some of those guys into your lineup if you do go with those guys as the core of your team. So they're going to be the core of a lot of my cash game teams. That's actually the core of the first Survivor entries that I put in already over on DraftKings, and that's who I'm going to be building around. So that's pretty much the way that I see it for today. Also, on DraftKings with Carlos Martinez's salary being down, just realize he's going to be very highly owned today, because in order to fit in some of these guys, you really need to have Martinez, because he's the only guy with the upside that really also is kind of cheap relative to some of the other guys that are above him. I think the guys above him are a little too expensive. I actually think Martinez is a little cheap. He should be closer to $9,000, and some of those $10,000, $11,000 guys should be, a little bit closer down to $10,000 or in the nines as well. But again, we don't make the prices. We just have to try to exploit where we see the best spots. And that's why I think Martinez is that guy today. So, basically at the end, today feels like a stars and scrubs lineup kind of day if you're playing in GPPs. So when lineups come out, try to find a couple of those cheap bats to make everything work. If you are able to find those cheap bats and you can take Martinez and pair him up with an expensive starting pitcher who you like, for me, that's Bumgarner. I don't hate Greinke as well. I think those are guys that you can look at. I think that's going to be a roster combination that can really get you a high score if you're able to find those cheap bats when lineups come out later. So that pretty much wraps it up. As you know, most of my crew over here at RotoCurve is at the Fantasy Sports Trade Association. I was able to stop over there last night, saw a couple of the friends I have in the industry. Was talking with the guys over at Fantasy Aces. We were talking a little bit about the Survivor tournament we had over here, the head-to-head tournament we had. They got a lot of stuff planned, a lot of good stuff coming up in the future. There were a lot of the sites there, a lot of the touts, services. A lot of those guys are guys I know. DFS is a great industry. Everybody's so friendly. It's really a good time when everybody gets together. There's definitely a lot of people that are still feeling a little hungover today, myself included. And, I'm going to head back over there pretty much when the show's over and do it again. Remember, we're going to have Wrath and Jason coming to you with the State of the DFS show probably next week, because I think that they're both traveling, obviously have to head back from New York City in a day or two. But they're going to have some good stuff. There's, a lot of stuff going on, a lot of people who you get a chance to meet with face-to-face, a lot of rumors and things that you hear at the FSTA. So Wrath and Jason will be breaking a lot of that stuff down for you guys. But as always, I thank you guys for tuning in today. If you have any questions, I will be in the forums for a little while, but again, I'm going to be heading back over to the city as well. So try to ask your questions kind of early, because come around lineup lock, I don't think too many people, too many of the Roto Curve, back room will be around at the time. But I will have my phone and my tablet with me, so I'll try to keep it open, and if I can find an internet connection, and try to help you guys out with any questions that you might have. So thanks for tuning in. As always, you can follow me at BennyR11 on Twitter. You can follow the Roto Curve page at Roto Curve. You can follow my partner Josh at Josh Kalachi. And again, this has been another episode of The Curve. Stay classy, DFS.